This week finds us somewhere quite different than the ancient Asia Minor and Greece of the Iliad. We travel eastward to the subcontinent of India for the epic work, the Ramayana of Valmiki. I hope you find this work enjoyable. I know I had a lot of fun reading it. I need to give a disclaimer here, though, one I'm sure that I'll repeat. I am a little bit out of my depth here in terms of giving you solid background information. Of course, there's no way I could be a subject matter expert in world lit, as we're covering too many different cultures and too many centuries for that to work. My own centuries of expertise range from CE 1500 to World War I, and then only in American and British literature. I did not have to read any Indian literature in my college training, nor do I have any first-hand knowledge of Hinduism. To complicate matters more, some of the resources I rely on for background knowledge contain criticisms from Hindu readers and viewers. I do not know enough about Hinduism or the literature of the ancient India to know if these critiques have any validity, so I've left off some background material that I would otherwise have consulted. Works like the Ramayana have a dual literary and theological importance in Hinduism today, just like the Psalms do for Christians and Jews, or the Quran does for Muslims. So hang on, I'm going to give a very broad overview of some of the important concepts in ancient Hinduism that you may encounter as you read the Ramayana, and also point out a few literary aspects to look for. Also, in advance, I'd like to ask forgiveness for any mispronunciations. Hinduism develops in India from the mysterious Aryan people who migrated into northern India and Iran sometime between 2000 and 1500 BCE. The term Aryan is fraught, of course, by its misappropriation by European white supremacists in the 19th and 20th centuries, Adolf Hitler being the most famous European to misuse the term. But I'm going to use the term in its historical sense related to India, as a term describing the peoples who migrated to parts of India and Iran from the Central Asian steppes. The Aryans brought with them their oral religious tradition, which were later transcribed in Sanskrit into the Vedas between 1500 and 500 BCE. Your textbook spends a decent amount of time explaining how specialized priests would memorize long sections of the Vedas so they could accurately transmit their religion to the next generation, so I won't go into that here. However, I do find memorization techniques like this fascinating. I wonder if these priests used mind palaces like Cicero the ancient Roman, or Sherlock Holmes. The Vedic religion of the Aryans gradually becomes what we now call Hinduism. In terms of Hindu beliefs, first let's talk about the idea of Brahman in the Upanishads. Brahman is the divine source of well-being. It can get a little confusing because the term Brahman also denotes a caste and is also the name of a Hindu god. Speaking of gods, 3 gods split the functions of Brahman in Hinduism, according to the Upanishads. There's Brahman, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer. Things get even more complicated because Vishnu and Shiva have numerous avatars, or manifestations as earthly beings. Rama of the Ramayana, for instance, is an avatar of Vishnu. Brahman, as the creator god, doesn't really feature heavily in Hindu literature, so we'll leave him there and move on to a much more active god, at least in literature, Vishnu. Also known as the preserver, Vishnu is the god of benevolence, forgiveness, and love. He could assume human form and was a very popular god. It still is. Rama, as mentioned earlier, is one of his incarnations or avatars, but Krishna, the charioteer, is another. Krishna features heavily in another major Indian epic, the Mahabharata, of which the Bhagavad Gita section is given in your Norton Anthology. In art, the avatars of Vishnu are depicted as having blue skin, and some people think this is because the art is depicting the spiritual aura, only visible to believers, of Vishnu. Your science trivia today is that there actually is a rare blood disorder called methemoglobinemia, which can be hereditary or brought about by certain diseases. Apparently there's a family in Kentucky famous for it. But I digress. Whether Lord Vishnu's blue skin represents his spirituality, a rare blood type, or, as has been also suggested, is a way to represent dark skin in art, you can easily spot him in his various avatar manifestations in Indian painting. Lord Shiva is known as the destroyer, but this term has both a positive and negative aspect. For instance, in order to create something new, one must destroy the old. Shiva is the patron god of yoga, the arts, and meditation, and he's often depicted slaying demons. Like Vishnu, Shiva has numerous avatars. Some sources I consulted listed 19, others 28. As the other early sacred texts of Hinduism, the Upanishads were first recorded a little later than the Vedas, sometime in between 800 and 300 BCE. They are also philosophical and religious texts of Hinduism. Much of the teaching in the Upanishads is communicated through dialogues between two characters. One of the characters is seeking knowledge from the other. The Upanishads complement the Vedas, and they provide commentary on the principles found in the older work. The Upanishads heavily influenced not only Buddhism, but other religions that developed first in India: Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism. And they are the source for many concepts central to the practice of Hinduism even today. Let's look briefly at some of them. Again, please remember that I'm not an expert in this topic, so bear with me. These slides will only provide a very broad overview of these concepts. You will hear a lot about Dharma in the Ramayana, as it is a central theme. Dharma means several things: cosmic order and law, the path to righteousness, and the combination of moral law and spiritual discipline. As you read about the adventures of Rama and Sita in the Ramayana, think about what Dharma means to each of them and how these characters are striving to live in accordance with this important principle. You may have heard that Hinduism holds with the concept of reincarnation. The proper name for this is samsara, and it is a cycle of rebirth. Traditionally, Hindus have believed that this cycle is, according to Dr. Flood, quote, a continuous cycle whereupon at death the soul is carried by a subtle body into a new physical body, which can be a human or a non-human form, an animal or a divine being. Moksha refers to the release from this cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. It occurs when the soul has been perfected through the cycle of reincarnation. Finally, the term karma, which you've probably heard of before, means literally action in Sanskrit. This concept argues that every good action produces a good reaction, and every bad action a bad reaction, either right away or in the future. The idea of a person's karma is that the sum of a person's actions will determine his future fate, including what kind of being he is reincarnated as. Now, I'm not going to go into the caste system of ancient India, as there's plenty of information on that in your book. Caste doesn't really come into play in our reading, probably because all the characters are high caste. How much the caste system is still at play in modern India and in the non-resident Indian community around the world is not something I feel qualified to speak on. I will say that if you watched Indian Matchmaking on Netflix this summer, you will have gotten a taste of how caste may still play into modern Indian life, at least for some people. The show has gotten a lot of critiques from the worldwide Indian community, so I'm not going to throw my own outsider opinion in on this one. Let's now talk about this week's reading, which are some excerpts from the long epic, the Ramayana by Valmiki. This work was probably first composed around 550 BCE, according to your textbook, but it has been added to over the years. Like the Iliad, it contains a large number of formulaic expressions, which may indicate that it was once an oral tale. The story covers such wide-ranging topics as politics, demon battles, and philosophical musings on various topics. The other famous Indian epic from this same time period, roughly, is the Mahabharata, and it takes pains to present its characters as human beings with flaws, like Gilgamesh and Achilles had flaws. The Ramayana, however, presents a more idealized view of characters. We have here in this epic the ideal son, the ideal wife, the ideal brothers, the ideal monkey king, and even the villain isn't all that bad. After all, his many wives mourn him greatly when he is gone. I'd like to fill in some of the action that isn't presented in the portion of the Ramayana that's in your anthology. First off, Dasharatha, the king, has no children, despite having 3 wives. After sacrificing to the god of fire, who is Agni, he receives an answer to his prayers. All 3 queens conceive sons. The first queen, Kaushalya, became Rama's mother. The second queen gives birth to twin sons, Lakshman, Rama's companion in exile, and Shatrughna. And the youngest queen had Bharat. Rama and Lakshman end up being lent to a wise man, Vishwamitra, to help rid his hermitage of demons, which they eventually do. As a result of Rama's success, he is introduced to the king of a nearby country, Mithila, where he wins the hand of the adopted princess Sita by stringing the great bow of Shiva, which no one has ever been able to do before. His brothers marry relatives of Sita, and there's lots of partying. Later on, the youngest queen extracts a promise from the king to grant her a wish, which she later uses to insist that he put her son Bharat on the throne instead of Rama. This is where we join the story. We don't get the bit about Bharat's reaction to his mother's schemes. He actually gets very angry at her and tries to get Rama to come back to take the throne, which Rama refuses to do until the end of the 14-year exile in the forest. Bharat put Rama's sandals on the throne and rules in Rama's name. If Bharat seems to give up the throne super easily when Rama returns, and you are wondering why, this gives you some backstory on why the transition was celebrated so widely in the story. A troubling bit in the Ramayana that we don't get in our anthology portion occurs at the end. After Rama had been ruling Ayodhya, his country, for several years, people start to spread rumors about just exactly what Sita was doing during those many months she was the prisoner of the demon Ravana. Of course, we may think that Sita has silenced those questions with her trial by fire earlier, but alas, this is not so. When Rama asks Sita to do another trial by fire, she refuses, and he banishes her. She is pregnant at the time with twin sons, Lava and Kush. She takes up residence with the writer of the Ramayana, Valmiki himself, and he raises the twins without telling them their parentage. He teaches them to sing the Ramayana, and the fame of their performance abilities eventually reaches Rama's ears. When the true identity of the boys is revealed, Rama again asks Sita to prove her faithfulness once and for all in a trial by fire, but she again refuses. She asks the earth to swallow her. Rama is instantly grief-stricken, abdicates the throne in favor of his sons, and he and his faithful brothers submerge themselves in the river Suraya, and their spirits ascend to heaven. So that's the part you missed. The Ramayana had a huge impact outside of its original intended audience. There may well be over 300 prose versions and poetry versions, both in the original Sanskrit, but also in other languages of the Indian subcontinent, including Tamil, Urdu, Bengali, and others. The Ramayana has traveled beyond India's borders too, and versions have appeared all over South and East Asia, including in such countries as China, Nepal, Tibet, Japan, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, and more. The other Dharmic religions, Buddhism and Jainism, have their own versions of the Ramayana as well. The Ramayana remains a popular source for adaptations in other media, and there have been TV series, anime films, plays, and even graphic novels depicting the action from the Ramayana. Of course, the epic has long provided a popular subject matter for visual artists. As you read the Ramayana, think about how Rama fits in with the examples of other epic heroes from our readings so far. What makes him tick? What is his quest? What is he consumed by? Why does he demand Sita prove her loyalty over and over again, even after she has already given him definitive proof? This from an otherwise ideal husband. What about Sita? How is the Ramayana also her story? I hope you enjoy this epic of ancient India, and I look forward to reading your discussion posts. That's all for today.